Our prejudices and self-interest shape the world into what we want it to be, or fear it is. So I was stunned that day when Francisco Crespo told a story guaranteed to get him 25 years to life. Crespo sat in my office 32 floors above Biscayne Bay, watching me through eyes the color of burned toast, sipping a WASP law firm's watery imitation of espresso through torn lips. He wore baggy khaki pants and a Disney World t-shirt, Mickey, Minnie, and Pluto, and was shivering in the air conditioning. He had a grid of welts across his forehead and cheeks, as if he'd been run over by a steel-belted radial tire. Good. That would help the self-defense claim, though it might be difficult to explain sneaking up on the Russian from behind. I could think about that later. But the first task was to summon a photographer and tell him to beef up the contrast to emphasize the cuts and scrapes. The face should be shot in close-up to accentuate the damage. There's a personal injury lawyer in town who once hired a professional makeup artist to crank up the color of his client's bruises. Using his experience with South Beach models who often tarnished their complexions with late-night drug fests before morning shoots, the artist found that reversing the process, adding eggplant-colored stains to perfectly fine skin, was easier and more profitable. But the lawyer got carried away, using a defrocked doctor to suture uninjured fender-bender clients, occasionally removing a healthy spleen or gallbladder. That seemed a tad excessive for the state bar, which suspended the fellow for 60 days or so. For the full-body pictures, I told the photographer to stand on a ladder and angle down, making Crespo look even smaller. Up close, you could see my client was one of those sinewy guys who was plenty quick and twice as strong as he looked, all muscles and wires strung taut across a small bone structure. Work-hardened hands, wrists thickened from his latest job, hauling crates at a customs broker's warehouse for non-union wages. The words Cuba Libre were crudely tattooed on his right tricep. His face was narrow, his complexion dusty. At least it had been before it had been bashed by the thick-necked Russian warehouseman. There was a gap where a front tooth should have been. But it didn't matter. Crespo seldom smiled. When Smorodinsky finished shaving Crespo with a chicken wire mesh, he just dropped him to the cement floor. While Crespo gagged and dry-heaved, the Russian gave him one good thwack to the temple with a reinforced work boot. The paramedics say the blow knocked Crespo unconscious, leaving him with a concussion. They found him that way, sprawled out alongside the refuse container. I would subpoena them as defense witnesses, almost as good as alibi witnesses. But no, Crespo insists the lights never went out. Tucked into the fetal position, feeling the cold concrete floor against his bleeding face, Crespo watched Smorodinsky dab at the blood on his own shoulder and lumber down the aisle between 30-foot-high rolls of Haitian cotton. You know, it would help your case if you were unconscious, just like the 911 boys said, I told him, as nonchalantly as possible. Okay, I know all about the canons of ethics. A lawyer shall not suborn perjury. But there's a footnote. It's okay to let the client know whether the truth will set him free or buy a one-way ticket to Rayford. I learned my ethics watching Jimmy Stewart coach Ben Gazzara into his temporary insanity defense in Anatomy of a Murder. And if that's too subtle for your tastes, how about James Mason teaching his client, a doctor accused of malpractice, a few courtroom tricks in the verdict? If you were seeing stars, I continued, somebody else must have...
Sí, yo sé, pero no pasó así. The medics are wrong. I wasn't going to let the bastard get away so he could drink vodka with these amigos and laugh at me.
It got worse then, of course. It always does. There was the Russian, heading for the exit, and here was my client, revving up his brain cells into the highest reaches of their 2-digit IQ, seeking revenge on a guy who resented being mistaken for a side of beef. Crespo said he watched the Russian turn left at the end of the aisle and head toward the loading dock. The Mitsubishi forklift was at the end of the second row.